Thank you. So welcome to the next session wherein we're going to do a deeper dive into the Community Land Trust model. I'm Bruce Levy, and along with my family and another local Bellingen family, we are a private provider of affordable housing. And if you had a chance to look at the case studies, and I'm happy to talk about this a bit later on with people, ours is the Kallang Lodge facility where we have 8 units currently for vulnerable and disadvantaged ladies, and we're hoping to increase that to 14 units over the next couple of years. So private providers can do something in this affordable housing crisis, so it's good. This morning we've heard about the bigger picture on the crisis that is affordable housing and what it means to our local shire. And as I said, during the break you've had the opportunity to see some of the local case studies of what's happening on the ground, so to speak. So now we'll be getting into a bit more detail about how the Community Land Trust model may, with support from the community and maybe some other government agencies and bodies, deliver some enduring change for the Shire. First we'll hear from Professor Louise Crabtree-Hayes, Australia's leading expert on the Community Land Trust model. Louise will provide an in-depth overview of how the model operates and its evolution into a globally recognised approach for delivering affordable housing that remains accessible for generations. Following that, our ever-ready bunny, Kerry Pearse, who leads our community Waterfall Community Land Trust project, will discuss the establishment of that project across the Bellingen Shire and surrounding areas. We were then going to have, unfortunately, we're going to have Mark Smith, the Executive General Manager of BCU, who's been working closely with the Waterfall Way Community Land Trust, but I've just heard he's got COVID. And so Kerry's been in contact with Mark and will be able to give us an idea of what's happening in that important space of funding for interested residents who wish to participate in the Community Land Trust model. So I'll pass it over to our short reduced panel, and then after that we'll have time for some Q&As where you'll be able to understand or have your questions answered about what a CLT is, how it could apply to our local crisis, and what you as members of the community can do to make that a reality. So I'll pass over to Louise.
Thank you, and yeah, it's just extraordinary. I was just saying to Kerry, it's extraordinary to look back over everything that's happened in the past 6 years since the first forum, and just extraordinary to see the progress that HMAG's making. So it's just such a thrill to be here again. So I'm going to do a bit of CLT 101. Some of you have heard this, so feel free to sing along if you know the words. And then I am going to talk a bit about the evolution of the sector and what's happening here. So, now.
It worked in the test run.
No, and it worked during our test as well. Oh.
No, it feels alright. We'll get rid of that one out. So you get to see behind the scenes here for a second.
It's working.
There we go.
Just try turning it on again.
Yes. Awesome. Okay, so here we go. Brilliant. So there's nothing really that magical about CLTs. They're just non-profit, for-purpose organisations that are set up to provide permanently affordable housing and community benefit. And that's sort of an intentionally broad definition because it means that each CLT gets to decide what those mean for its community. So permanent affordability can mean whether it needs to be rentals or affordable ownership in perpetuity, but also enables a greater diversity, such as things like cooperatives, because it's the community saying this is what affordability needs to be for our communities. They're very much place-based. You can also then get literally any form of housing on a CLT. So that can be apartments, freestanding homes, but also things like co-housing, eco-villages. Again, depending on the community saying this is what we actually need to see, this is the gap in our local housing system. And likewise, community benefit can mean literally anything that your community needs to see. So is it youth employment programs? Is it food access programs? Is it childcare centres, aged care centres, medical centres? So internationally, you will see literally anything possible being done on a CLT because the community has said that's what we need to see here in perpetuity. So they hold title in perpetuity, so it's there for generation after generation. And you'll also see immense diversity in what they do. So they'll partner with anyone who is mission aligned, whether it's for-profit or non-profit, and you'll see a diverse range of income streams going through the CLT on that basis. So as I said, it's very much about addressing those community gaps. So it's channeling community aspirations into perpetual programs. So the focus is very much on quality and longevity because they're there in perpetuity, so they're not going to set things up that are dodgy, that are second rate, because their membership's going to say, well, why are we doing this? Why are we doing stuff that's no good for our community? And so where there's affordable home ownership as part of the CLT stock, which will be scattered throughout the region that they serve, that ownership stays affordable in perpetuity. So they'll use a range of legal agreements to make sure that it stays affordable when it's resold or when it's left to kids or in a rental property when it's leased out to the next person. So there's a range of legal agreements that they use to make sure that the homes are staying affordable in perpetuity. And the permanently affordable ownership component is something that we're really critically missing in Australia. And we've got this, as we know, this immense gap between the rental and ownership options that are available to people. So where CLT ownership models come in is very much in that gap between those two to give people an ownership option that's not going to break them when they try and pay for a market rate purchase product. Okay, so you'll hear them saying things like we're the developers who don't go away, because they'll undertake development or undertake partnerships to develop, but they're there in perpetuity. So they build better homes. They tend to build homes that are really energy efficient, that are well designed, they'll be universally designed so people can age in place, because they know that they're part of the partnership in perpetuity. So if you own your home, you own it in partnership with the CLT. So it's a different relationship to the open market. So because they're there as a permanent partner, they know that if the thing's falling down in 30 years, that's going to come on them. So there's a very direct incentive to build things to last that are going to be appropriate as people's lives change and so on. They'll also say things like anything you can do on land, you can do on a CLT. And they'll sometimes refer to, sorry, I didn't have it up there, but sometimes they'll refer to themselves as undertaking development without displacement. So they'll improve their neighbourhood, but not at the price, not at the cost of people having to move out because the place has now become too expensive to live in because it's been gentrified. So it's very much about how to improve a place without displacing community. So you can see they're the classic board structure. So they're very, they'll have very big memberships, and the memberships are more than the people who need housing. So the CLTs will be made up of potentially thousands of members who live in the region and believe in the organisation. So I believe in its mission, I really want to be involved in this, so I'm going to become a member. I don't need housing, but I believe in the organisation. So that's why you get that really strong community voice. And you can see that that makes up a third of the board members. Another third will be the people who are in the CLT homes. So as a resident, you yourself, you're a member, you can also run to be on the board. Those 2/3 then typically appoint the other third, and they'll usually be strategic appointments. So do we need a lawyer? Do we need someone with financial expertise? So very strong community voice going all the way through the membership through to the governance of the organisation. So that's what I'm just saying there. Anyone who lives in the area can be a member and take part in decision making. And it's very much about bringing community together in all of its diversity to have an ongoing productive conversation around that original aim. What does affordability need to mean? What does community benefit need to mean? And having that be alive ongoing conversation, so it's always appropriate to place. Quick caveat, they're not trusts as understood under Australian trust law, because Australian trust law says that a resident would not be able to be on the board because it would be seen as a conflict of interest. So even though they're called CLTs internationally, there's this weird glitch here where we say, you can call yourselves a CLT, but just don't say you're a trust, because that quite paternalistic relationship between trustees and benefactors is really not sympathetic to having a resident voice on your board. Sorry, a bit of legal nerdery there. And as I said, you've got this classic three-part structure that's balancing resident, community and broader societal needs. So we're able to benefit on about, that nice little pie chart is about 40 years of trial and error in the United States, where if one sort of body dominated too much, the CLT might go in strange directions, like, we don't need it to be affordable anymore, let's just flip it all and move to the Bahamas. Or let's put in really onerous policies that are really draconian and really oppress the residents, or let's just, fight endlessly about where things are going to be. So this has been a really nice point to come in on all of that trial and error. Okay, so I'm talking to the global network about making sure that the Australian dots are in the right places, because those are all wrong. But anyway, they're Americans, let's just be patient with them. So this is the global map showing that CLTs are popping up all over the place. They emerged in the US in the Deep South in response to the revenge evictions of the civil rights movement. So when African American farmers were getting kicked off their land every time there was a civil rights game made. So they actually came up, there was two women in a kitchen, I'd like to just say, who came up with this idea of holding the land in perpetuity and not letting it go out into the market. So it's based on taking the speculative element out of the land. And now it's everywhere because everyone went, oh, that's kind of good and it seems to be working. So in the United States, there's about 225 of them, thousands of homes from very affordable rentals through to resale restricted home ownership. Most CLTs do a mix. They'll do rentals and they'll do home ownership, and they'll do things like co-ops and so on as well. So let's have a look at them. So Champlain's currently the largest. It's operating over 3 counties, salt and peppered all over the place. They've got over 4,000 voting members. They've got 1,600 rental units, 600 owner-occupied homes and 100 housing co-op units. And again, every form of housing imaginable. But then they've also got this extraordinary range of commercial and community uses on their lands as well, and again scattered throughout those 3 counties. And they were established by the city with startup funding. So this is something I'm going to sort of talk about a few times, where local and or state government has actually played an active role in setting up the CLTs and sometimes in keeping on supporting them through things like affordable housing levies. But it looks like this. It's basically indistinguishable from any other form of housing throughout their counties. So this is individual home ownership, affordable rentals upstairs from commercial, and so that's all on land held by the CLT. And this is a low-income co-op that's on land held by the CLT. And this incredibly diverse range of commercial and community uses as well. You can see senior centre, child space, refugee centre, queer space, aged care centre, healthcare centre. These folk take abandoned bicycles and fix them up and make them available for free. There's a garage upstairs that does the same thing with cars, there's a food shelf, etc, etc. Okay, so jumping the ditch over to England. So this is sort of building on the US sector. In the last, I think, 15 years, something like 350 CLTs have popped up in the United Kingdom. So rapid growth is possible, which is a really encouraging thing. And so they put out a report last year, so you say 350 that exist, with 209 more in development, and everyone that they partner with as well. Let's see that one. There it is. So they're partnering with existing community housing providers, private developers, local government, and all of these other spaces popping up: green spaces, workspaces, community centres, etc, etc. So very rapid, sort of condensed repetition, or a model similar to the US, but over a very compressed timeline because of being able to build on the knowledge of the US sector. So looking at some of the UK ones, London CLT, this was one of the sort of first flagship ones, showing that you can do it in the middle of a really, really overheated market. And this was a three-way agreement between the Greater London Authority, Private Development and the CLT. So the whole thing once it was redeveloped, it was an old hospital site. Once it was redeveloped, the entire thing was handed over to the CLT, with the private developer operating market rate housing through a lease on non-profit land, which is a really interesting reinterpretation of how property is operated. Usually it's the other way around. Usually it's the for-profit that gets the whole thing, possibly with a non-profit holding some of it. This is the other way around. The non-profit's got the whole thing with a for-profit operating a subsection of it. So it's a really interesting reinterpretation. Got permanently affordable homes available to local people with prices determined by key worker income. So they've indexed it to those incomes. And while they were building, some of those figures are invisible, while they were building, they actually ran community design workshops that then were incorporated into the final design of the site. And the really nice thing is some of these prices. So they're in Mile End, so just nestled in East London. Their prices were running between £130,000 and £235,000. The market rate was running between £400,000 and £500,000. So it's less than half the price of the open market. And those are indexed in perpetuity to tag with local wages. They're not going to go up at a market rate. So extraordinary outcome for the middle of London. And that's what it looks like. That's one of the design workshops they had. This was before development, and this is what the site now looks like. And they've just done another one in Lewisham. And again, property prices are set by what local people earn, and they stay that way. So lastly, before I jump to Australia, what we're now seeing across Europe is the emergence of cities going, we need to do this and we need to grow it at scale and we need to do it fast. So there's really nice, the text here on the right is what's been agreed to in Barcelona. So they're setting up a citywide policy platform and a funding pipeline with the end goal of a fully fledged CLT. And similarly in Berlin, I love this headline, I just want to put that up on every slide because we're seeing public sentiment change around the treatment of property. So this was a referendum that was held where I think it was a 60% or 67% yes vote to turn 226,000 landlord-owned homes back into public housing, possibly through a CLT model. So we're seeing change in terms of the way people want their housing system to operate. So here, this is where the dots are meant to be, because this is the Australian map. We are seeing CLTs getting established here, and as was mentioned earlier, we've now got the Australian CLT network, which Rose Jackson spoke at the launch of. So we've got ministerial interest, we're talking with local governments, obviously, and also with the feds. And so one of the things that we've done, because when we talk about resale restricted ownership in particular, quite often you'll hear people saying, oh, no one wants that. People want to be able to speculate on their homes. And we heard Alan saying it, that's what we've come to expect. So we basically went out to the market and say, well, is that true? You know, is it actually a deal breaker if people can't make megabucks on their homes? So we ran focus groups with 25 to 34-year-olds who were looking to buy but unable to do so. They had the deposit, they had an income, and they were just constantly chasing that deposit gap because the houses were just going up and up and up and up. And so we put out a call. We didn't say it was about CLTs. We didn't actually talk about what we're going to be discussing. We just said, are you trying to buy your home but unable to do so? And would you like to know how you might be able to do so? So it wasn't ideologically, sort of leaning towards any particular model. It was just, are you currently unable to buy? And we ran 4 workshops. Most of them were in full-time employment. They had a deposit. We talked about an inner-city apartment development, basically at build cost. So taking the land value out and saying it's probably going to be 25 to 30, 50% lower than market, depending on site specifics. It was a hypothetical. And then we talked about the resale restrictions and what they would and wouldn't be able to do in terms of that you can't sublet it at a market rate, you can't Airbnb it, those sorts of things. And also you can't buy the CLT out. So these resale restricted models sit within what's often called shared equity. And we do have some shared equity systems in Australia, and some of those are being talked about in terms of being able to, over time, buy the partner out of that deal. So maybe you go in as a 50-50 deal, but over time you step up to 20, 75%, 80%, etc. What we've seen internationally is that those are really, really tricky. They're really hard to manage. They often end up in legal challenge. And so we've been pushing hard to say, don't allow staircasing. If people want a market rate product, they sell this back to the CLT or to another qualified buyer at the restricted rate and take that equity to go out into the open market. So this home stays affordable, because what we've seen internationally is that that staircasing is a mess. And so we spelt that out to people. We played it really conservative, and none of them were worried. No one who turned up said, oh, I don't know, this doesn't sound like it's for me. I think out of the 4 focus groups, there were 3 people out of 40 or 38 who said, probably not. So I think it was like 95% of the attendees were like, I would sign up right now if I could. So absolutely dispelling that myth that people are simply driven by that profiteering on home ownership. Interestingly, where the equity component, where the cash component came up in terms of how much am I going to make, was pretty much after they'd exhausted every other single thing about what they thought about the model. So people were like, oh my God, I can have pets, I can make improvements, I can set it up so that I can work from home appropriately. And they'd go through literally everything, and then they go, oh, I guess if I leave it to my kids, then they're not going to inherit as much. But then they'd make the next step of going, but that doesn't matter, because if I'm in this situation, I'll have been able to enable my kids in other ways. Or I'll have been able to put money aside in other ways. So, and that wasn't us prompting them, that was just people thinking through, what difference would this make to my life, and what would it enable me to do differently? And it was extraordinary to just hear people do that thinking in real time, and start thinking about all the other things that it would open up in their lives if they had a stable home. And we've seen that in all of the stories that we've heard this morning. So there you go, 35 out of 38 would have signed up if possible. I honestly thought we were going to get mobbed. I was like, what do you mean it's hypothetical? Interestingly, people really liked the idea of being in partnership with the organisation. So they were talking about help with saving for their deposit. I'd like to know how I can get into this product, and I'd like some help with some saving. So the other thing was that people wanted financial planning as part of the package as well. Are you going to help me get into this? Okay, great. We're actually in a partnership, so you're going to help me skill up and learn how I can budget, how I can get a savings plan, etc. And realising that it was a non-profit, so they weren't getting scammed by someone who had a vested interest in making money out of them. That was such a big deal for people, to know that this is someone who's helping me into this so that I'm okay, not so they're making money out of me. Very much a desire for clear language and a transparent process, which the CLTs all focus on. They all wanted independent legal advice as well. It was very attractive and felt to be necessary. And again, that's what the international CLTs do. There's like, don't just take our word for it, go get your lawyer. We're not going to sign anything until we know that you've talked this through with your lawyer and that your lawyer thinks it's okay as well. So that it's very much not a hard sell. Interestingly, there were varying levels of interest in being involved in the CLT. So we said, well, you can actually be on the board. You will be a member. You can run to be on the board. So is that of interest? And people started saying, well, yeah, actually, I like the sound of this organisation, and I think I would like to be on its board. So again, we started to hear these things that people might not have been thinking when they walked into the room, but once they were part of that conversation, it was like, yeah, well, actually, this is quite interesting to me. And then, at least one person in each group was genuinely excited about the perpetuity and the ongoing community benefit. So this was a totally mainstream market, as I said. It was literally just, are you trying to buy a home and unable to do so? And then by the end of the conversation, at least one person in each group was saying, I love the fact that this is in perpetuity and it's about more than me, it's about future generations, it's about the broader community. So there is a market and an interest out there that we don't acknowledge when we talk about housing. We presume everyone wants speculation, we presume everyone's in it for themselves, and what we saw in this is categorically that that's not the case. Once people know, there's another thing that you can do. So, here's some quotes. People saying things like, I support this model more than I support the private ownership business model. The potential for it to do broader good things, that would be a major selling point for me. Saying, yes, okay, you buy a house, you've got a little bit of that home ownership, good stuff, nest egg, whatever, but you're actually supporting something bigger with the potential to be influencing things outside of that. That would be a huge motivator for me. And then saying, if we can actually create a culture that says this is okay, imagine how many people don't have to work 3 jobs to pay rent and they can be home with their families or out in their communities and doing things. So people saw this as a way for communities to be thriving and for future generations to be thriving. So categorically showing that there's a different narrative out there and different interests that are out there if we provide products that speak to those and enable them and uphold them in perpetuity. So I think that's the end of me, it is. So we're now playing tag. So I have the extraordinary honour and pleasure of handing over to Kerry, who needs no introduction at all. Definitely the Energizer Bunny. But over to you, Kerry. Thank you. So how did you do that? And just there. Right.
Still operating.
There we go. Beauty. Great.
Hi everybody, the Energizer Bunny. I'm going to see if I can sort of grow into that. So thanks Louise, that was a really great overview of the Community Land Trust model, and it's really good lead into the discussion about the establishment of the Waterfall Way CLT, which is the second flagship project of the Housing Matters Action Group. So this project is now underway across the Shire, and really keen. I'm pleased to see so many people stayed. Thank you for staying after we lost Alan. We know lots of people came to hear him. But very keen to talk with you about this project and invite your involvement. So, you've heard a lot about the model itself. From our perspective, at least initially, we're seeing as the CLT model as a way of getting housing in place across the Shire for what we would call the missing middle. So if you think about the stats that I talked about before and the huge gap between local wages and house prices, people who aren't eligible for social housing or affordable housing and are the people who pretty much are the glue of our communities who keep things going, just have not got a hope to buy into the market outright or even rent because of that huge gap between local wages and real estate prices. And so initially, the Waterfall Way Community Land Trust is really focusing on what can we do to provide housing for locals who are people in that missing middle. Louise talked about all of these things. I guess the only other thing I do want to say is that being backed by the Siddle Family Foundation to do the establishment of the Community Land Trust really means that we have resources, we're able to put time in, we've been able to buy in specialist expertise and to do this in a rigorous and very considered way. Oh, it's me. Probably I intended to say a couple of things I think about how we are doing it before I go into the features. So we have an advisory group of people with specialist expertise who's been set up to guide the project. I'm the project lead and I work on this project a couple of days a week. And Rose, who you have met, works with me for 1 day a week. But we have a group of people with a lot of expertise who are guiding the project. Some of them are here. I might ask you if you're on the advisory group just to wave your hand around so people can see you. So Joe and Bruce and Michael. We've got other people who aren't here. Liz Jeremy was here before. The General Manager of Council, Mark Griffey, and Mark Smythe from the BCU Bank, who was going to be on the panel today. And there's probably about Linda Dalton, a local lawyer who's got a lot of expertise in shared equity models. I know that I'm Professor Robin Quiggin, who's from UTS and lives in Urunga and has a lot of expertise, particularly in First Nations housing and policy, and is a lawyer. So there's probably about 10 or so people on the advisory group who are guiding this work. And then we have what we call the working group, because we love structure and governance. And the working group is a group of people who come together who are more likely to be residents or interested in being a resident, and a bit more grassroots, who are the people who we workshop with around policy and decision making as we're building the model. And we're really keen to grow that group because we really want this model to be shaped by the people who are going to get the, for whom it's going to serve. And over time, we're setting up that sort of group on the plateau and in Bellingen and in Urunga. So we're working, Dorrigo's the first place that we've done any outreach, and there was a lot of interest in Dorrigo, and if people are from the plateau, that group's going to be up and running soon, and the same thing will happen across the Shire. So that's the sort of the backstory around how we're doing this. At the moment, under the auspice and support of the Housing Matters Action Group, and there are people, I might invite those of you who are on the management committee, the Housing Matters Action Group, to stick your hands up. So Pauline, yourself, Michael, Liz, an apology from our chair, Steve Clippen, and Stephanie Ring, who couldn't be here today as well. So, there's a bunch of locals with different expertise who are working on this. So, the features, although Louise talked about the breadth of community land trusts and the range of community benefits and the sort of activities that a CLT can get involved in, our immediate and priority focus is around housing. Long-term, secure, shared home ownership for locals. Over time, once the CLT is established, it would be a wonderful platform for things like renewable energy or food security, or a raft of activities that the community may wish for. But our presenting priority and focus is around housing. Louise talked about how it's run by and for the community. Our initial focus is around co-ownership. And shared equity model. It could be that we also explore 99-year leases. That will depend on where the land comes from. But that's our current starting point. We've done a lot of work already on the formula for the resale limit. So Louise talked about that as one of the fundamental features that keeps the homes affordable into perpetuity. The model that we're working with is that a resident member would buy in for the value of the dwelling, not the dwelling plus the land. Initially, it's very likely that that would be the construction cost. And we spent some months delving into different formulas for how you would determine a resale limit. There are ways of doing that based on the market, and there are ways of doing that based on indexes. And we ended up settling on an indexed resale formula, so that if you bought in for the value of the dwelling and you then needed to change your circumstances and sell, the CLT would have first option to buy, or would then, if that wasn't possible, find a accredited buyer. And you would get what you had put in, plus the average of CPI and regional wage growth. So you would get your money back, unlike when you're renting, and you'd get a modest increase, which would then mean it was affordable for the next person. We thought we would be incorporated as a company limited by guarantee by now, and we will be incorporated by the end of this year, but we've been doing a lot of work to figure out how we can maximise the likelihood that we'll be registered as a charity and able to access tax deductibility status, which is a tricky thing from a policy perspective in Australia for this sort of model. And it may be that that takes us longer. We're in the process of doing a risk assessment based on some legal advice that we've had from Inter Ellison, who are working with us on a pro bono basis. But we know we can't go much further forward until we at least are incorporated. And so we've done a lot of work on the Constitution. It reflects the model that Louise outlined. And we're now in the final stages of figuring out how we go forward. So I've covered some of this. This is absolutely for locals. Our footprint is the Bellingen Shire and surrounding areas. Surrounding areas is deliberately vague because we want to be able to be opportunistic and we want to be able to respond to need around us. But we're not talking about regional north coast of New South Wales. We're talking about the home is the Bellingen Shire. In our discussions about locals, and these sorts of issues have been worked through by the working group, which is the consultation forum, and the advisory group. We're talking about people who either already live in the Bellingen Shire and surrounding areas or can demonstrate a demonstrable tie. So they might have grown up here, they might be key workers who want to work here. They're people who have to show that they've got a tie to this place. As I said before, our initial focus is on trying to find an answer to the really bleak situation we find ourselves in relation to how can people who are on local wages live here, and what do we do to keep the community going in terms of that cohort. So that cohort also does have the capacity to raise finance and make a contribution to their housing costs. They just can't cover the whole cost. So the shared equity model that Louise talked about is where we're starting, noting that over time, if there are ways to partner with other organisations or get funding from the Housing Australia Fund, for example, that Helen talked about earlier, and to develop targeted responses for very low income earners as well, that absolutely is on the deck, but it's not the first cab off the rank. And this model can also, as Louise said, it's a very, very flexible model. The form of housing is model and flexible, and the target groups model, the target groups are flexible. And so depending on what the community needed and where the needs were, we could decide that we wanted a particular project to focus on a particular group of people, or young working families or tradies, or very flexible and responsive to community need. Okay, I'm being given the wind up. I think I'm close. I won't talk through all of these, but this is an example. This sort of tells you where we've got to. We've been up. The project has been in establishment really in real terms since August last year, so we've just hit 12 months. A lot of work has been done on a lot of these things, but there are two big barriers, and I know a lot of you will already be thinking about, well, how on earth are they going to be able to do this? These two challenges were identified in a proof of concept report that the Joint Organisation of Councils actioned with Bellingen Shire Council's advocacy a couple of years ago. And it's not rocket science. The two key barriers to this model in our context are access to finance and access to land. I'm going to come back to access to finance in a minute, but we've actually done quite a lot of work on this, and there's people look at me and say, you must be mad, you don't think you're going to get low or no cost land for this, surely. And we think, yes, we are. And we've got three strands of of action working on this. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about the land audit in a minute, and you heard about that also in the film. But we also think that there are ways of incentivising the planning system and maximising voluntary planning agreements and other planning mechanisms that could create land coming into the Community Land Trust into the future. And Council's very open to working with us in that way. And also, obviously, we're very interested in bequests and donations over time where people do have resources and they want to leave a legacy. So a lot of work has been done on trying to identify potential sources of land through a mapping exercise where we then can make direct approaches. That's the sort of journey that we've been on, which we are very pleased to have been able to do with Urbanista, which is a planning consulting company with a lot of professional expertise, who mapped all of the land holdings in the Bellingen Shire and then basically sorted them according to criteria that we agreed and came up with a short list, or a long short list for us to visit. And so over 3 days, we visited around 50 sites across the Bellingen Shire, and you can see that was the breakdown of those sites. And we're looking for land that can be transferred to the CLT that's either government or not-for-profit owned. Wrong way. And, sorry, back. And so from that short list of about 50, we did these visits, and we now have a very short list of about 6 sites. Some of them are council owned, some of them are not-for-profit owned, and some of them are state government owned. We've had discussions with senior people in the state government. We're working closely with council. We don't think it by any stretch is going to be a walk in the park, but we're pretty confident that all we need is one piece of land to demonstrate the proof of concept. And, you know, it's very heartening when you think about what's happened in the UK, if we can just show that this can work. So that's a proactive, pretty rigorous approach of looking for land. Now, I'm going to try and channel Mark Smythe, which is very difficult because Mark Smythe is probably about my height, but he's a very stylish looking man. He's got very thick, stylish glasses and has a very colourful and enthusiastic personality. And he's the General Manager of BCU. And joined the advisory group when we first started because we knew that we needed to crack this nut around access to mortgage finance. Most people would know that mortgage finance for shared equity ventures in Australia is almost impossible to get. It's certainly impossible for multiple occupancies and other forms of innovative housing. And so we knew we couldn't do anything unless we were able to find a way through that. And Mark joined the advisory group, and he was intending to make a bit of an announcement today, which is no longer able to happen. But what I am, and he's very sick with COVID, he doesn't just have COVID, he's really crook. And so he gives his apologies. But BCU have become very interested in this. They've been doing their own internal work on this model. They've done a significant risk assessment. Their credit, do you remember the name of that committee? Their credit committee met last week and assessed the risk assessment and all of those internal things that big corporations do. And he was intending to basically make a statement of intent that mortgage finance is very likely for this. And we think this could be, we think the whole project could help be a national game changer, but certainly we think that access to finance is a national game changer. And one of the risks that they identified was what they called consolidation. So they didn't want to be the only bank that was in this space. And so they've reached out to a couple of other mutual banks, which I don't know if I'm in a position to name, so I won't, and don't ask me to, please. But there are now 3 mutual banks who are working together have signed non-disclosure agreements to look at how they might be able to develop a mortgage product for a model like a CLT or a CLT. And my hope is that once that happens, that will open up the pathway for co-ops, for multiple occupancies, for other forms of innovative shared equity. So yes, I didn't channel Mark, but I did sort of channel our agreed key messages. So we are now at the end. I know I've probably gone way over time, I'm very sorry. We really want you to get involved. This is only going to happen if the community really gets behind it and becomes a community movement. Please register for our newsletter. That's the way to get updates. If you're more than interested in just getting a newsletter, please join the working group, because we need your minds to help us workshop through the key policy issues as we're building this model. Once we're incorporated, we'll be calling out to the community for people to register their interest. And clearly, we are after donations and bequests and financial help. Please talk to your friends and your family and get the word out about this model. It's no mean feat to do this, but together we're pretty confident that we're going to be able to crack it. And thanks to Bellingen Shire Council, who have worked closely on this with us since the beginning, which was in 2018, and the current council also and Mayor have been very supportive of this project, and we're very much looking forward to working with council after the new council is in place to get to really practical nuts and bolts discussions. And of course, a big thank you to the Siddle Family Foundation, because we just couldn't be doing this work without your support. So, are we back up here?
So, is there a panel?
I think we are. I think we were intending to do a panel, weren't we?
Yeah, or maybe do we want to agree on time? So we're right on 1 o'clock. Will people stay for a 15-minute panel?
For questions and a bit of discussion, or do you want to call it a wrap?
Give it 15 minutes. 15 minutes. You can be short and prompt with your questions.
I can't wait to give this back.
Okay, hands up. Who would like to have I'll run up here. Max, go on.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks so much for sharing that information. I'm not sure I'm entirely clear, but in the first instance, are you thinking about for people to have home ownership via the shared equity model? So in terms of renters, it's not a model that will be used initially for people who are seeking to rent?
Yes, we're looking for shared ownership, but a lot of people who are currently renting would be able to be resident members and be able to raise the sort of finance that they would need to be co-owners. If in the future, if we were offering a rental model, it would be a model that needed capital funding from somewhere else, not from people's financial contributions, and they probably would be lower income earners. And at the moment, the financial model for that isn't very clear, and we're wanting to help those people in the middle. Yep.
Hi, first of all, I just feel like getting down on bended knee and going like this to you guys, what you've achieved, so amazing.
Can I just say it's absolutely a team effort, that there's been a group of people who've been working on this. Yeah, thank you, Thea.
Yes, but just want to acknowledge
Thank
the
you.
amazing achievements when you're up against it all. I just wanted to focus on, the acquisition of land, and you put up there in your model, you're looking at it from local or state government or not-for-profit, or hopefully some nice rich person might donate some. how does it work from the perspective of the person who's either donating the land or handing it over? What's the agreement with them? I mean, they're in it for they get some return as well, and is there a cap on that? How does that bit work?
So some people think it's possible to develop a CLT based on a financial model where there is a return on investment for land. That's not the model that we're looking at. So, I mean, I hope that we're wrong and that in the future it is possible, but we are genuinely looking for low cost or no cost land. And where, you know, as Louise said, Minister Jackson spoke at the launch of the Australian Community Land Trust Network, and she made some very promising comments about access to government land. There's not-for-profit owned land, there's underutilised government land, and there are also residents who, you know, do have more than enough for themselves and their families who want to make a difference. So that's our starting point.
This is really a question about once you get rolling, how do you fund yourself for management of all of your legal costs, and you know, how are you going to do that? Because at some point you're going to have to bring money back in to run the show.
Great question, and sorry I didn't cover it. There'll be an operational levy. We're in the great position of being backed by the Civil Family Foundation to set everything up, so that's a big peak of work. But once we've done that, there'll be an operating levy that resident members will contribute to. We'll have to keep the costs down as low as we can, but that's the way that those sorts of ongoing administrative costs will be covered.
And if I can just add from the international perspective as well, so there's that sort of operational or admin fee, which, as Kerry said, you keep it really low so you're not pushing people back into housing stress through that fee. But that's also where the membership comes into play. So if you've got a few hundred or a few thousand members, then you've got membership fees, again, which are staggered, but then you can have fundraisers as well, and you start working those networks through the membership to think about other ways to bring money in, as well as the administrative fee.
So all those fundraising nights at the golf club?
I'm up here.
Hi, Boaz.
Hey, Kerry. This is for Louise, given that you've got a more international perspective on things. Two questions. One is, if you've looked into it in terms of insights around funding models for resident members, is that what you call it? In terms of, I mean, I looked at the London numbers and you said they range from 130 to 235,000. That's still quite a large amount of money to come up in cash for somebody who that needs to resort to accessing this kind of model. So if you can give me, I'd like to hear a little bit about if you've got some insights around funding models. And the other one was about dispute resolution, given that people are more than resident but less than full owners. One person in a small community like that can be really disruptive. Wondering about just getting some insights around that. Thanks.
Yeah, so the first one, was that around how the resident gets the funds to buy into the property? Is that what you were asking?
Yes.
Okay, so that's where Kerry's point about the credit union being on board is so key, because people do go and get a mortgage, but they're ideally, if they've been renting for a while, if we think about the people in Melbourne that we ran the focus groups with, so they're people who have been able to save a little bit of a deposit, but they can't buy in the open market. So they then talk to the credit union and say, I've got this deposit, I've got this income, this property is geared to my income. And so from the bank's perspective, that's a much more viable proposition than supporting that person going out into the open market, because they're going to be able to afford those repayments. So it's a mortgage situation that they're going into, it's a much smaller mortgage. So those UK prices were actually geared to local working incomes. So people like police officers, nurses, etc., that's a price that they can afford to pay without going into housing stress. And that's why they've geared it to those incomes. So is that answering the question?
Somewhat. I was hoping to get some more insight into what other models have done overseas, because I understand that it addresses the affordability from a bank's perspective criteria, but from a bank's perspective, they also have about security. If these people who are taking these commitments fall over for whatever reason,
Yeah.
then traditionally a bank goes and repossesses
Yeah.
the house. In this instance, you cannot,
Yeah.
and that's why in multiple occupancies, you don't have. That's why banks do not fund multiple occupancy shares.
So the risk management perspective from the bank's point of view?
Not from I'm just wondering about other models. It doesn't have to be a bank. It can be whatever. I'm just wondering, given that there are so many of these models around in England and US, which are similar law structures, if there's any insight into that.
So I'm going to not speak about internationally, I'm going to speak about here, because this is the very issue that we've done a lot of work on in terms of our constitution and with Mark Smythe from the BCU. So in our draft constitution, we've come to some agreements around what call the bank would have at the last, if everything else didn't work, how the bank would be able to realise its interest in the property if they had mortgaged, and that's been resolved, and we have a process in place that we're comfortable about, and that's a pretty big thing, because that's the step that the bank needs in order to be willing to develop the finance product. I just want to say one other thing about something you were asking about, Lois, because I forgot to mention it in my presentation. We have started to crunch the numbers about how much local workers would be able to borrow if they didn't have a bit of a nest egg that they could also draw on. And we can see that with the cost of building having skyrocketed in the last few years, that it's not going to be easy. And so one of our next priorities is to really look very hard at low-cost building options and ways that we can reduce the construction costs so that we can get the sums to stack up.
Sorry, what was your second question? Because I've totally forgotten it. Oh, dispute resolution. Okay, yes. So you flagged. You said in small communities like these. So these aren't intentional communities, and they're not small. So like with Champlain, they've got 2,500 properties spread over 3 counties and a voting membership of 4,000 people. The dispute resolution, so that influence of one problematic person is a lot more diffuse in that situation. And that's why you've got that 3-part board structure as well, because you can balance out those voices and you've got a really sort of strong governance framework. The other thing is that the dispute resolution processes are very clearly spelt out in the legal agreements, and that's part of why people get independent legal advice and why the CLT insists that people do get independent legal advice, so that they know exactly what it is they're signing up to, so they can't suddenly turn around and go, but Kerry sold her house for $3 million, why can't I? And that's also part of why they're very proactive in utilising the membership and having a lot of membership events and a lot of resident events to keep reminding people that they are part of this thing that's bigger than themselves, because and again, trial and error, some of the early CLTs found that if people got into an ownership situation and it was working really well for them, which is what you want, over time they'd kind of forget that the CLT existed, and then when they went to sell and it was like, well, you can't actually make the same amount of money as you make down the road, they'd be like, what? Because they've basically forgotten that they're actually in a partnership. So there's a lot of work on keeping that relationship really live, as well as the prep work and making sure people understand what they're signing up to, and then having really clear dispute resolution processes spelled out in all of their legals.
Thank you. Another question here?
Hi, Kerry, Steve. Sort of flowing on from that point, Kerry, I know in the past presentations we've discussed how this model, because it's hard for people to get their head around it initially, despite the excellent presentation we got from you, Louise. Thank you very much. It's hard for people to get their head around it. So could you maybe just explain with the local model how this differs in terms of not necessarily being site-specific compared to, say, a retirement type village project?
Sure, thanks Steve. So it is a very flexible model. One of the things we've decided though is that whatever land does, we are able to find we want to get the biggest housing benefit from. So at its simple, when we started on this journey, we were thinking that we might end up with single lots and someone might just raise a mortgage and buy in, and it would be a house that just looked like the same in Sunset Ridge Drive or wherever, and no one would know, and it would just be a self-detached house. We're not thinking that anymore. We're thinking that at least you'd want some sort of infill, so that if you've got a big block, you might have 2 families on the block, not one. But we're not talking about, a big tract of land where you've got a whole community living together as a multiple occupancy necessarily. We might end up one day being able to have some sort of co-housing village. We might have a small block of flats. We might have a series of what look like detached houses, but they have secondary dwellings in the back. And people are buying in as co-owners with the CLT for the value of the dwelling, not the dwelling plus the land. Does that help? Yeah.
Okay, one more question.
It's a hard thing to answer because it's so flexible and it can really respond to what the community needs at the time. So it's a different way of thinking about it.
I'm wondering whether there's the possibility of, obviously building costs are very high and land costs can be. Like, I'm in a situation where I experience quite a lot of, I've got a mortgage, but I experience quite a lot of mortgage stress, and I rent out 3 rooms in my house to try and be able to afford that. But, wondering, is there, would there be a way of, me being able to be part of this and have, I guess I'd have to renovate my house a little bit, but is there possibilities of something like that? You wouldn't need to buy the land, there's already a house there, maybe it needs to be changed a bit to make it an affordable place to live for, someone who works in the hospital or something like that.
So there's definitely ways of entering into partnerships and arrangements with people. An individual homeowner would really have to think about what was it that they were giving up to enter into, the CLT needs land. Things like eligibility processes, we haven't really, we really want to consult with the community about that. But, I know that in my own situation in Firefly Hamlet, we've modelled what we're doing on a CLT model, and it's not out of the question that sometime down the track a project like that might end up being part of a CLT. Am I answering the question that you asked? Yeah. It's an emergent thing, and we need to work this out as we're building it, preferably before we're flying it.
Okay, let's thank our panel. It's a very difficult topic, but I think we've had a chance to dig in a bit deeper to understand how it can be modified to suit our particular requirements in our shire. And I think, Michael, are you going to do a closing for us? Very quick one, thank you.
I'm going to make this very quick because we're way over time. So I was asked to kind of summarise the key takeaways from the day, and I was actually talking to a journalist at the start, and she said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Well, look, we want to highlight that, you know, housing issues are not just about metropolitan areas, that, you know, in regional areas we have some very serious housing issues, and they're only getting worse, but also that local action can actually do something about this." And I think we've demonstrated that very well today, that, you know, we do, because we've got people who are really interested in this community and in this town and actually keeping it viable in the long run for all kinds of people, that there are some things we can do locally that can push that along. And I'll just remind you, we talked about this morning about the RFBI site in Watson Street, and certainly, I mean, Housing Matters Action Group has, well, we didn't actually build it or acquire the land, but we've been very active in getting that project going, making sure it was properly targeted, and we're amazingly excited about the fact that we've actually got 23 older single women, some of them coming from very precarious housing situations, who are all smiling today because they can't believe that now in their retirement or their twilight or whatever, that they've actually got secure housing for some people for the first time in 30 or 40 years, and that's a fantastic. And then, you know, looking further forward, we've just had this great discussion about the Community Land Trust, and this is still, you know, in the theoretical realms, but I'm pleased to say I think we're further advanced with this than anyone in Australia. We've thought through the issues, the governance issues, the legal and the finance issues, to a point where we're getting more and more confident that we will actually see developments happening in a very in the foreseeable future. And I'm not going to put a time frame on that, but it's not going to be that far away, I hope. And that affordability will be in perpetuity, removing those places from the kind of market forces that Alan was talking about this morning, which, you know, it's all very well to complain about them, but they're there and they're going to stay there, so we have to find ways of extracting housing from that, or at least a part of the cost of housing from that market. We've also, some things that weren't mentioned today, is we've had an active role in that National Community Land Trust organisation, setting that up and getting that network going so that we can exchange these ideas with people in other areas. We've also secured funding from a different source to set up a rural housing network, which is putting together groups like ours from all over the country to discuss what they can do at a local level to address some of these really difficult issues. So thanks for coming along and listening to that today, but we want you to now go and tell other people about it and get everybody in the Shire excited about the kinds of things we're doing and willing to contribute their energy and their knowledge and even their land. That would be great. So it says here, spruik upcoming events and ways to get involved. Okay, so there is a QR code. Yep, oh, it's a big one. There's a QR code on the screen behind me, and that will, if you scan that code, that will take you to the website where you can find out more about what's going on. You can also join the Waterfall Way working group, the Waterfall Way CLT working group, as Kerry was talking about. We've also been running regular, supposedly monthly, not always monthly, learning circles. I can see a few people here who've been regulars at our learning circles where we talk about the whole nature of the housing crisis, possible solutions, and etc. And have some very, very lively discussions about the local impact, but also the national and the global context that brings us into the situation we're in today. Okay, there will be you saw in the film this morning, the Bellingen Shire Council local housing strategy was mentioned, and there will be a further meeting in early 2025 to focus on progress with the local housing strategy. You're welcome to come and attend that, to become a member of the Housing Matters Action Group, and to think when you're voting in the elections. I see early voting started already. When you're voting in the elections this week, to keep housing in front of mind. So that's all things for you to do. It only remains for me to actually thank contributors today, all the speakers and panellists and volunteers who've been doing things, looking after the name tags and everything else. Brenton Lugnan, who gave us the welcome to country this morning, which was extremely personal and made us all feel that we had a role to play right across the community. Also, we've had here today is Lieutenant Pat Conaghan was able to attend this morning. Steve Allen's still here. I think other councillors and candidates and so on who've helped. I don't know. Is Cass here?
She's there.
Oh, she's here. No, there she is. Thanks for coming along, Cass. So that's all there is for me to say. We've got a little presentation for Rose West, who's been extremely busy writing all the notes for everyone and preparing everything for that. Thank you very much, Rose.
Rose really did all of the work, really, just with a little bit of help from a few of us. But and thank you, Emma. But it was a huge thing to organise today, and the displays upstairs.
So just finally, I think the studio is still open with some of our information about the projects we've been talking about today. There might even be some cake left over. And also Kerry, Liz and myself and other members of the Advisory Committee, CLT Advisory Committee and the HMAG Management Committee will be hanging around for a bit.
We'll be at a table.
Oh, we're going to sit at a table. Okay. Okay, good.
Just on the way
We're
out.
doing box pop, so if you want to, Jay and Pauline are going to interview a few people just to get a sense of what you've got out of today. So they'll be at
Yeah, so if I grab hold of you, just say, no, I don't want to, or yeah.
Great. Okay, so they're all things you can do, and just remains to say thank you for everyone who's come along. It's great to see the Mem Hall full of people to talk about this really important issue, and we can all get involved. So thank you.